In today's lesson, we are going to take a look at our endosymbiosis notes. So these notes are going to go along with what we've been talking about with our history of life, where we're looking at basically how life got started, right, and then how life has changed over time, right? Darwin's idea of natural selection. So the theory of endosymbiosis helps to explain where eukaryotic cells came from. Because if you'll recall, the very first cells on Earth were prokaryotic cells, right? So they didn't have a nucleus, they had a couple of ribosomes, right? But they're very basic, very primitive. Well, the idea is that this primitive prokaryotic cell came across a smaller prokaryotic cell that was aerobic. Right? So this free-living aerobic bacterium, right, crossed paths with this prokaryotic cell, and what happened is the prokaryotic cell ate the smaller bacterium. Crazy, right? Well, we're pretty sure it happened. Then that gave rise, okay, right, to our earliest mitochondria, because, right, this cell, right, was aerobic, meaning it was taking in oxygen, it was making energy, just like the mitochondria does, right? We also start to see the precursor of the nucleus due to some folding in of the cell membrane. So like if I take a piece of paper and I fold it in on itself, right, the DNA is going to get stuck inside like a taco. So we now have a prokaryotic cell with a mitochondria, or at least the early ancestor, right, to a mitochondria. But then the prokaryotic cell, it comes across a second prokaryotic cell that's smaller than it. This prokaryotic cell, it's not aerobic, it is photosynthetic. It's a photosynthetic cyanobacteria. So guess what our prokaryotic cell is going to do? If you guessed eat it, then you were right. So our prokaryotic cell has now eaten the early ancestor for the mitochondria and the early ancestor for the chloroplast, right? Both of which are organelles found within eukaryotic cells. Well, as time went on, and we're not talking about like a day or a couple of years, we're talking like hundreds of millions of years, right? Geologic time, okay? So as time went on, these three cells formed a mutually beneficial relationship. So, right, we've got our nucleus, right, with our DNA. We've got our chloroplast taking in sunlight, making glucose, and our mitochondria taking in glucose and making ATP energy. So all three of these cells have a really good relationship with each other. So our large cell that ate the other two, right, it's benefiting. How? It's getting energy, right? It's able to take in sunlight energy and make ATP energy to survive, right? It wasn't able to do that before. But, you know, what's the benefit to the chloroplast and the mitochondria, right? They got eaten. That's kind of bad. But it wasn't bad because they didn't die, right? Normally you get eaten by a predator and you become lunch. No, that didn't happen. Basically, the digestive enzymes of that prokaryotic host didn't kill the chloroplast and mitochondria ancestors. And so it's like, okay, I got eaten, but I didn't die. Why would I leave? Why would I go back into the world where I could get eaten again? No, I'm going to stay right here. So all three of these cells are benefiting from each other. So this idea, right, is where the ancestral eukaryotic cell came from. So again, endosymbiosis. So endo meaning within, right? So these two cells, right, they were engulfed. They are inside of the larger cell, right? Together, right, there are three of them. And then living, right? Bio, meaning living. So endosymbiosis, living within together. So they are all benefiting. So we call this the endosymbiont theory, right? And it proposes that the mitochondria and the chloroplast are descended from prokaryotic cells that were engulfed by ancestral eukaryotes. Because remember, our ancestral eukaryote already had kind of a nucleus, right? So it was on its way. And the evidence that we have to support this theory is that both the chloroplast and the mitochondria, they have a double membrane, right? Because they got eaten, remember? So they were already surrounded by one membrane, and then when they got eaten, they're now surrounded by two, right? Where did that second membrane come from? It came from the bigger cell because they got eaten. Both have their own ribosomes. We know ribosomes are important because they make proteins, right, through protein synthesis. And then both the chloroplast and mitochondria, they have their own DNA. So they could have at one point existed as their own cell because they had a cell membrane, they had ribosomes, they have cytoplasm, and they have DNA. And last but not least, both the chloroplast and mitochondria, they're able to reproduce independently of the cell. So when a cell goes through mitosis, the mitochondria and chloroplast, they replicate themselves. They don't rely on the nucleus to help them. They do it all on their own. So this idea, right, this theory of endosymbiosis explains the origins of eukaryotic cells